Johnston, can we ask you about the other donation? Can we ask you about the other donations you say Shelley Buck did? What do you base that affirmation on?
I don't have a great deal of detail on that. I just know that over 50 years or so, she's been a very generous woman.
But did she tell you that she donated to other parties?
Not with any specific detail, no.
What are Brian Top and Don Guy telling you about? What's their role in all this?
They've been providing advice on communications on how we get our report in a way that it can be understood by the public and that we can put real urgency into dealing with foreign interference in our election process.
Do you worry about the credibility of your report if some of the opposition parties don't want you to go forward?
Sorry, would you repeat the question?
Do you worry about the credibility of your report, both your current report and your final report, and the whole process if so many opposition parties, all of the opposition parties, don't want you to continue?
Well, I worry a great deal about the credibility of our democratic institutions and foreign interference, and that's what this report is all about.
One last question. Yeah, I'm trying. Have you spoken to the Prime Minister, the Prime Minister's office, since you tabled your first report and there has been this motion in Parliament?
No, I've only spoke to the Prime Minister to deliver the report on the day that it was given.
And not since.
Sir, do you think you changed any minds in there today?
Thank you. Good to see you all. Take care.
Malheureusement, je pense, I think my mind is, and the impressions that we had are reinforced. I think the contradictions from the testimony today, and I have enormous respect for Mr. Johnston, but the contradictions between why a public inquiry isn't a good idea and the problems with his interim report, I think are evident to people. The explanation that somehow it would be more costly and it might take a little bit longer. When you couple that with his very clear advocacy that this is a real and present danger to our democracy, it just doesn't jive. So my sense after listening to his testimony is I'm even more, I think, convinced that a public inquiry is the only way to restore public confidence.
Dernière question, M. Julian. Vous avez demandé sur quoi vous vous basez pour dire que sa conseillère juridique a donné à d'autres partis politiques. Avez-vous été convaincu par ces réponses?
Non, non. Il a glissé ces mots-là. Ça passait presque inaperçu. Il dit, mais elle a donné à d'autres partis. Mais est-ce qu'il sait? Je ne sais pas. Et c'est le genre de contradiction, malheureusement, qui était assez fréquente dans son témoignage. Autre exemple, quand il a parlé du fait qu'il n'a pas parlé avec le commissaire des élections et pas parlé avec Elections Canada parce qu'il n'y avait pas de plainte. Mais là, on sait qu'il y en avait beaucoup et que le commissaire des élections est en train présentement d'enquêter sur plusieurs cas des plaintes qui ont été faites. Et maintenant, ils disent, mais plus tard dans la journée, ils disent c'est pas la question des plaintes, c'est la question des cas résolus. Alors, ces contradictions-là, moi, je pense, sont évidentes. Je pense pas qu'il a réussi aujourd'hui de diminuer les 72% des Canadiens et Canadiennes qui veulent une enquête publique. Il n'est pas convaincu les parlementaires non plus.
Le fait qu'il fasse une déclaration sur laquelle il n'est pas capable de dire sur quoi il s'appuie, est-ce que ça remet en question sa solidité, sa fiabilité?
En tant que personne, non, mais en tant que rapporteur spécial, oui. Et le rapport, je pense, a des faiblesses qui sont très évidentes.
Were you aware that there was a senior NDP, like a former senior NDP strategist advising him, Mr. Top?
No, I wasn't.
Do you have any concerns with that?
No, I mean, I think our concerns are with the process. Our concerns are we believe in a public inquiry, and that's what we're going to continue to push for.
Do you think Mr. Johnston is seeing the whole picture? Because we keep hearing that you've got to see the whole picture to get the idea of what's out there. Do you think he has?
I don't, particularly in relation to his responses around the Commissioner of Elections and Elections Canada. I mean, these are serious violations of electoral law. There are complaints that the Commissioner is actively investigating. That comes from the testimony on March 2nd. So it seems to me to have an interim report that is solid and credible, that information is absolutely essential, and that wasn't part of what he explored. And so these are the contradictions, these are the weaknesses in this overall report. And the approach of Mr. Johnston, I think that is why there is, in my mind, a growing number of Canadians saying we really need a public inquiry.
What do you say to Canadians who may be tired of Parliament debating about this issue, whether or not he should resign, whether it's a public inquiry that's needed, and say that parliamentarians need to actually get to work and make concrete changes to improve the electoral system, especially with an election on the horizon?
I think that's fair. The NDP, of course, is focused on things like dental care and affordable housing, which is why we're debating C-47. But in terms of elections, yes, a public inquiry is the best way, that first important step that then allows parliamentarians to take the actions to ensure that the next election, and Jagmeet Singh has been very eloquent about this, that the next elections are free from foreign interference. That's what all Canadians want. I don't believe, and I think his testimony confirms that. I don't think that Mr. Johnston's approach is one that is going to restore public confidence. We need a public inquiry, and then parliamentarians need to make those decisions to actually put in place all of the elements that ensure that our next election is free and fair.
That parliamentarians can do now while this debate is going on? For example, pushing the government to put in this foreign agency registry sooner. Is there not work that can be done as this discussion goes on?
Absolutely. And as you recall from the NDP motion last week that passed the majority of parliamentarians, we've actually asked PROC to start the work around even structuring a public inquiry. PROC, Procedure and House Affairs, is also looking into the question of privilege raised by Mr. Chong. And so, yes, parliamentarians are doing that other work too. But what is essential to this, I believe, and Jagmeet Singh believes, and the NDP caucus believes, is a public inquiry. We're going to continue to push for that.
Monsieur Johnston a fait mention à plusieurs reprises du juge O'Connor et de ce qu'il aurait dit là, après l'enquête publique sur Maher Harel. Qu'est-ce que vous faites de son explication, là, comme quoi une enquête publique, c'était très compliqué avec les informations confidentielles qui étaient en jeu dans cette enquête-là, puis que dans ce cas-ci, ce serait un peu la même chose, ce serait très coûteux et très difficile de tenir ça publiquement. Qu'est-ce que vous avez fait du fait qu'il a donné cet exemple-là plusieurs fois?
À mon avis, c'est une contradiction parce qu'il parle de l'importance de contrer l'ingérence étrangère, mais en même temps, il dit, mais là, ça va coûter un petit peu plus cher, puis ça va prendre un petit peu plus de temps. Pour nous, c'est essentiel qu'on ait la crédibilité auprès du grand public canadien, qu'on peut mettre en place toutes les mesures pour empêcher qu'on a l'ingérence étrangère à l'avenir. Alors, pour nous, c'est absolument essentiel qu'on agisse. Je n'ai pas vu cette explication-là crédible quand il s'agit d'un élément tellement important pour notre démocratie. Merci beaucoup.
It looks like Sheila Block has donated 25 times since 2003 to the NDP. Does that make things better or worse?
No, we looked into that. It's not the same Sheila Block. Yeah.
All of them? 25?
Yeah.
25 of them are not the same woman?
No, there's more than one Sheila Block in Canada. Merci beaucoup.
Okay, we'll have Mr. Cooper and Mr. Berthold from the Conservatives for reaction. Go ahead.
Three times, Parliament voted for an immediate public inquiry into Beijing's attack on our democracy in 2 federal elections, and the fact that this Prime Minister turned a blind eye to that interference because it benefited the Liberal Party. There are only 2 people who seemingly don't want a public inquiry, and that is the Prime Minister and his ski buddy, Mr. Johnston. As a result of Mr. Johnston snubbing his nose at Parliament's call for a public inquiry, not once, not twice, but on 3 occasions, Parliament voted non-confidence in Mr. Johnston. It's long past due for Mr. Johnston, the fake rapporteur, to resign from his fake position. And after today, it's no wonder Parliament voted non-confidence in Mr. Johnston. Mr. Johnston repeatedly demonstrated willful blindness to the fact that he is in a conflict of interest having regard for the fact that he has a long association with that of the Prime Minister, the fact that he was a member of the Beijing-financed Trudeau Foundation that is mirrored in scandal, and the fact that he has surrounded himself with Liberals, including the lead counsel for his so-called independent investigation, being a Liberal donor who just recently, a few years ago, was even rubbing shoulders, at least virtually, with the Prime Minister at a Liberal fundraiser. And then, when it comes to the substance of the report, Mr. Johnston demonstrated that he simply wasn't familiar with key conclusions that he drew. He wasn't able to explain, for example, how it is that he concluded that there was no direct interference by Beijing in terms of spreading disinformation, notwithstanding that there were documents that this committee had, including from Global Affairs Canada, that demonstrated that Beijing state sources were involved in spreading that disinformation. So whether it be conflicts everywhere, to not understanding or not knowing key elements of his report, it's time for Mr. Johnston to go. What Canadians deserve is a full, independent, public inquiry led by someone who works for Canadians and not the Prime Minister, as Mr. Johnston does. Mr. Berthold.
Yeah. Merci beaucoup. Écoutez, aujourd'hui, on a assisté au témoignage de M. Johnston après 3 votes au Parlement, 3 fois où le Parlement a demandé majoritairement d'avoir une enquête publique indépendante et dont le dernier vote a demandé même le départ de M. Johnston. Le témoignage de M. Johnston aujourd'hui n'a pas réussi à nous convaincre que le vote du Parlement était juste et que ces votes mériterait d'être écouté de la part de M. Johnston. Essentiellement, moi, ce que je retiens du témoignage aujourd'hui, c'est qu'à chaque fois qu'on a mis M. Johnston face à une situation de conflit d'intérêts, il a confirmé la situation, mais il n'a pas reconnu, il a fermé les yeux sur la gravité et sur l'apparence de conflit d'intérêts de chacune des situations qu'on lui a présentées aujourd'hui. C'est pour ça qu'avec le témoignage d'aujourd'hui, notre opinion n'a pas changé. M. Johnston doit partir, il doit le faire par respect pour la démocratie, par respect par le mandat qu'il a reçu et par respect pour tous les Canadiens qui demandent son départ et qui demandent une enquête publique indépendante sur l'ingérence du régime de Pékin dans les élections de 2019-2021. Et sur le contenu du rapport même, on a été également très surpris de voir le peu de connaissances de M. Johnston, de certains éléments de son propre rapport, notamment sur les articles du Global Times dont vient de parler mon collègue Michael Cooper. C'est assez incroyable qu'on puisse en arriver à des conclusions sans avoir eu toute l'information en main sur plusieurs éléments. Notamment, une des questions qui est restée sans réponse, c'est le fait que plusieurs députés, pas un ni deux, mais plusieurs autres députés, dont on parle d'au moins 3 députés, a été la cible du régime d'ingérence du régime de Pékin et que M. Johnston n'en a même pas fait mention dans son rapport, pas fait mention de la Fondation Trudeau, n'a pas fait mention des postes de police du régime de Pékin sur notre territoire. Donc, pour toutes ces raisons, le témoignage de M. Johnston ne nous a pas convaincus. Il doit partir et on doit maintenant réclamer et obtenir une enquête publique indépendante.
Your party brought up Brian Topp and Donga in there. What do you guys know about their advice to Johnston and their work with him?
Well, Mr. Johnston conceded that they're providing advice. So we have another liberal advising Mr. Johnston and a New Democrat, former chiefs of staff to a Liberal government and an NDP government. He's getting the advice of the cover-up coalition, raising more questions about his independence. Mr. Johnston has to go.
Did you hear anything today, given that Mr. Johnston could sit in there for 3 hours and talk about, in what he's seen, that maybe your leader should take that classified briefing? I mean, or do you still think that he would be handcuffed? He wouldn't be able to say anything?
Mr. Poilievre is not going to be silenced. He's not going to fall into that trap. What we need is an independent public inquiry. And what we need right now were answers from Mr. Johnston. And what we got was a special rapporteur, a fake rapporteur, who was confused, who wasn't on top of his brief and couldn't explain key conclusions that brushed away Beijing's interference and the Prime Minister's failure to act. What Mr. Johnston's report is nothing more than a whitewash. It has no credibility, and Mr. Johnston demonstrated that today in his inability to answer the most basic of questions.
But if classified information is being presented to your party and offered to you that could provide a bigger, wider picture of the situation, why not take it and just organize some type of agreement about what information can be shared? It's normal for parliamentarians to get classified briefings.
The issue is not for Mr. Poilievre to go into a briefing and then be silenced by the Prime Minister. What we need is a public, independent inquiry. What we don't need is a whitewash of a report where we have a special rapporteur who, for example, dismisses Beijing's interference in spreading misinformation, and yet right in documents that he should have reviewed, it provides very clearly that Beijing sources were providing that information. So thank you very much.
Thank you. It's Johnston.